The game you're seeing right now is called Songs for a Hero, and it's a 2D platformer adventure where the main character not just narrates, but sings his stream of consciousness thoughts for the duration of gameplay. And it's incredibly high effort in that regard alone. But we're actually here because I found out that English, or the international version rather, is not the game's original language. The original language is Portuguese, Brazilian. And before anyone complains, the developer of this game I've talked to actually called the language Brazilian, so who am I to argue with that? Who are you to argue with that? Anyway, upon choosing the Portuguese language option in Songs of a Hero for our character's voice, I was baffled to find out that the English subtitles were not available if you wanted to listen to the hero in Portuguese. No, instead, the English subtitles are only available if you're already listening to the hero in English. You're not allowed to mix and match for whatever reason, and I set about finding out why this might be. So while I talk about my discussion with one of the game's developers, let's watch some gameplay of Songs of a Hero with the singing disabled. Which you figure, if the developer was certain that the singing was core to the experience, would be impossible to disable. But here it is, disabled. And the subtitles as well. We're going to start at the first level, already past the intro cutscene, and just get right into it. So the first thing I said was it would be ideal if we could have English subtitles enabled during the original language singing. The option would be easy to implement and it would be a good idea since the English singing is a bit worse and off-tune. I actually believe I typed off-tone, but both were criticisms I had, so they're pretty much interchangeable. And I was a little arrogant in presuming that it would be an easy change to implement for reasons we're going to find out. Before I get into the developer's responses, I want to make it clear that I'm going to have the conversation and images from the conversation available in the description, and I'll re-upload them if they get removed somehow, but the developer's name is going to be blacked out, because even though this chat took place in its entirety in a public Discord server, I still don't want to use his name without his explicit permission. And the developer's response was a lot more disheartening than I ever could have anticipated. He said, Addy, since the content of the Brazilian lyrics are full of slangs from Brazil, it would not make any sense to have the 3000 translated. By 3000, I'd later found out he was referring to the 3000 verses in the songs in the game. He then went on to say, we had to localize it all, turn to a new culture, make new jokes, and etc. That is why there is no literal subtitle translation for the game. The experience is not the same. Upon reading that reply, I was just immediately heartbroken, because it seems to me like the developer himself is explaining to me that he didn't really care about preserving the original vision of his own art, and instead 4Kids'd it the fuck up. Of course that turned out to be wrong. I'm wrong a lot. He actually did seem to care a lot about the original vision and the potential of preserving it for English-speaking audiences. It's just he thought that wasn't the best decision. In my response, I tried to explain that frankly it shouldn't matter whether it makes sense when translated directly, because that's just how the original is. It doesn't matter if the sentiments don't cross cultural barriers. But he just repeated, and this is a direct quote, the story is the same, some people even prefer the English version. There's a lot of stanzas that would make no sense in English if translated directly. Both versions are family friendly. I believe we made sure that because of the age rates we get, and since we are a small company doing that work 2 times, localizing and literal translation plus syncing the song and adjust the subtitle size for individual 3000 stanzas, would keep us from doing DLCs or expansions. And upon reading that response, it occurred to me that a lot of it didn't have to do with anything I was concerned about. Like, of course, some people are going to prefer the English localization. That doesn't mean anything. The original should still exist with an English translation if you're going to bother bringing the game over to English-speaking territories. He made it explicitly clear that the English, or rather international version of the game, is not a translation. It is an entirely new thing. The content is completely different, and a lot of the dialogue had to be changed. And I was arguing from the point of art posterity, of course. Like, English-speaking people should be able to experience the art in as faithfully translated a format as possible. We deserve better than localizations. I know we don't have a great habit of interpreting art in the best way over here, but still. Some of what he said, though, did seem to imply that it was a matter of cost, at least partially. Like, they already expended so much cost to localize the game, they really didn't want to have to do a literal translation and retime all of the lyrics and everything. I expressed that maybe I could help with that, not like directly or anything, but I would raise funds for it, you know, go around telling people, hey, it's important to preserve the original artistic vision of things. We need to make sure that the artistic vision is upheld, that the script is translated as faithfully as possible, and the intention gets across the best it can, even across cultural borders. Art should still remain the same art, even when it crosses countries, to the best of our ability. So yeah, I was willing to fundraise a bit, if that meant getting a proper translation instead of this 4Kids localization we wound up getting. And his response was, let me read it directly from his message here. The experience for the game is what we are aiming for here. Giving that literal translation did not work in our research with international audience. What that response tells me, at least the best I can parse from that response, is that by research he meant focus groups. He focus tested the game with a more literal translation, or rather the entire development team tested it, and it didn't work out in their favor. People didn't like the literal translation. He did seem to insist that even though many things were changed, that the story and the content were largely the same, although simultaneously vastly different. So I asked, even if I can't get a faithful translation, can I at least get the option to put the existing English subtitles over the existing Portuguese singing? Or to quote my message directly instead of paraphrasing, at least that way, the story as a whole can still be understood by English speakers who prefer the original singer. He then went on to explain that would be impossible, because it's just, they can't do it. There's too much difference between the English and Portuguese version for the timing to match up with the subtitles. This would tell me that when he said the story was the same, he was not being entirely truthful. And later, to directly quote a bit from one of his messages, he said, "The story are the same, but the content of the lyric subtitles are not." I was completely baffled at that reply. Because, like, does he mean the overarching story is the same? If so, that's not the important part. The content of the game is in the song, in the character dialogue. It is a musical. If the content of the lyrics is changed significantly, then it's no longer the same story. He then went on to say, and this is another direct quote, "The original work voice choice were made for Brazilian audience. The English for international one. That is why the voice is so different. It is more like Eric Cartman or Animaniacs Iago. It is more close to how acting is in international cartoon world." That reply also, like so many others, broke my heart. I hate seeing shit like that. Reasoning like this is why English dubs are the fucking worst. Of course there are exceptions, but for most English language media and English dubs of foreign media, we make everybody sound like a wacky-ass cartoon character with a high nasally voice that's super obnoxious. So they intentionally replaced a Brazilian guy who nailed the game's tone and singing perfectly with a really nasally, obnoxiously over-the-top voice actor, doing his best to sound like Eric Cartman, apparently. There's a little hyperbole in there, of course. I can't know if the original voice actor matched the tone perfectly, but he sure as hell seems to match the overall tone of the story better than the English voice actor does. And he again expressed worry about whether the original version would make sense with all of its unique Brazilian cultural references. I reiterated, and this is a direct quote, "You shouldn't worry about whether it makes sense, though. A lot of subtitled work doesn't make sense in other countries, but it's still translated as faithfully as possible. That's how the original art is, you know? But it's completely different now, unrecognizable in many ways from the original in tone and content, like you've said." As you might be able to tell by that response I made, I was pretty passionate about this thing. And I'm going to read his response directly from his message here. He said, "We have to worry about it, since the international audience needs to enjoy our game as much as the Brazilians did. We live on selling copies of the game, and we would not have gone so far if we did not think on the audience we are aiming to. And there is no content from the original that is not on the international. They are just put it in different words. We hired specialized people who work with localization, not translation. Again, by this reply, you can see he keeps bringing up that the English version is not a translation. It is a 4Kids style localization, and that is my problem with it. No matter how much he says that there's no content that's not the same, he keeps admitting that there's content that's not the same. It's completely baffling to me how he can keep saying there's both. But it's very clear at this point that, you know, I'm not getting a subtitled faithful translation of the original art. That's just not happening, so I figured, you know, he admitted he hired localization specialists to do this stuff to his work. So I'm just gonna level my criticisms about the localization and duck out. So what I said in my response was, to quote a bit of my message, "It shows that you hired specialized people. The choice to make the hero sound like a South Park character is particularly grating and makes him harder to like, but that's personal preference. The original singer is soothing and his cadence is professional. He could easily have a career in singing with his delivery. The English voice seems more like a gimmick. All of the changes seem like they were made with marketing in mind, to appeal more to streamers and less to people who just want to experience the original story. Thank you for your time, though. I learned a lot about the process of the translation and why it sounds so different. I don't have any hard feelings." And that was the last response I intended to make. And I'm going to quote his final response to mine in its entirety right here. He said, "Not marketing only, it was the experience. We have zero marketing budget, our international reach is full organic and made by people who enjoy the game. We tried lots of singers, we did the test. The best result we could achieve is the one we delivered. Thank you for the feedback. It give us another perspective. Some people prefer the Brazilian, others the US. We wish we could make everyone equally happy, but we have to choose a path or else the game has no new content. But I will keep that in mind in future games." And that was his last response. The final words exchanged were by me. I typed, "No problem, you obviously did what you thought was best." And that was the conversation. So I learned a lot from that. Mostly I learned man, it turns out that even people that make the art can be okay with it getting butchered. And even them being okay with it getting butchered doesn't have to be entirely motivated by monetary gain, even though that was certainly a factor, it seemed. It seemed that by hiring specialists and making deliberate marketing changes, such as the tone of the voice actor, they knew that they were going to sell better. It seems like they were mostly concerned about the American and other international English audiences getting the same experience as the Brazilians. But that's paradoxical, I think, isn't it? Because we're not getting the same experience. Not even close. We're getting a specialized experience that's a completely different piece of art from the one that the Brazilians originally got. We're not even getting a close approximation because they deliberately changed the tone of the singer and deliberately changed what some of the dialogue meant beyond the necessity for translation. This kind of thing really drives me fucking insane. I thought we were done with this stuff, but I feel like, in actuality, art preservation and artistic integrity, especially when translating foreign works, is a very niche thing. Like, a lot of companies and people don't see the point in translating faithfully. But that's not even what happened here. It seems like the developer saw the point in translating faithfully, he just made the decision that it wasn't worth it as opposed to the alternative. And maybe he was right. Songs for a Hero is pretty popular in English-speaking countries, and streamers and YouTubers really seem to enjoy the new voice actor and the changes in dialogue and humor. But you know what, I'm gonna be frank. I don't think it fucking matters whether people like it more. Alright? I don't think it fucking matters. I don't even think it fucking matters if the English version is better. It's not even remotely the same work anymore. He explicitly outlined the changes that were made, and they're changes that no longer qualify this as the same art. Am I being a curmudgeon? Maybe, but I really care about this artistic integrity and preservation shit. I wanted to experience the original work as faithfully translated as I possibly could, even if I don't get the jokes. And barring that, I would at least like the option to understand the story without listening to the really terrible English voice acting, but that's also not an option available to anyone. The way the developer painted it, it was a choice between doing a localization and creating an unfaithful product, which gave them a profit, or creating a translation and not making a profit. I don't think that choice really ever happens. I feel like either way they were likely to have turned a profit, and in fact translating it literally probably would have cost less, no matter how disastrous they think it would have been. Keep in mind, when I say translated literally, of course, I mean as literally as possible to preserve the intention. I don't mean 100% literally, because that's not how language works. I just mean as close to literally as can be. But even if they were 100% right, and they couldn't have released it with a translation that was faithful and still turn a profit, that's just fucking awful, isn't it? Like, that's just an awful situation. It shouldn't happen. There's obviously no way for someone to be objectively right or wrong in something like this. This is all moral and philosophical bullshit we're dealing with today, alright? But I hate this. This is a beautiful, incredibly high-effort game concept with a lot of context-specific sung dialogue, and I can't enjoy it because the English version is insufferable to listen to for me. And even if the English version wasn't insufferable to listen to, I would have to live with knowing that it's not faithful to the original in many ways that matter. But alright, I'm done venting now. Again, you can find the whole conversation in the description with the developer's name blacked out. Most of the quotes that I didn't say were directly quoted were paraphrasing for time, so if you want to see the full conversation, it will be in the description for transparency's sake. And I'm going to end this video with a comparison. I'm going to let you see the English outro to one of my favorite levels, and then the Brazilian outro, and you can decide whose fucking singing is more dignified and does better justice to the game's concept.
I remember the last time that I climbed so close to the sky. I was struck by the queen of all snakes, she almost set me on fire. Oh my. Looks like the scenery has finally changed. Maybe all this climbing has come to an end.
Da outra vez que acabei subindo assim, uma serpente gigante partiu para cima de mim. O ambiente muda, parece um sinal de que a subida chegou ao final.